Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our online event with Emily Jellish from TD. Emily, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. And she's going to be talking about job search tips for internationally trained professionals. And I'll let her talk about herself before she gets into it. And I'm really excited about this webinar today. And I'm going to hand it over to Emily now. Emily, it's all yours.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks for handing it over. And welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time chatting with you. I really love doing these. I always learn something from everybody on the call, so thank you for taking the time to join me. I apologize that I'm not technically proficient enough to have a working webcam, but hopefully with the materials that'll help work us through. So why don't we start at the beginning with my career, just so you have an idea of who I am. I'm a lawyer by background and training. I have worked as a lawyer, but I've had most of my career in various banks, largely Canadian banks, but I've lived outside of Canada several times as well. I've changed roles many times. While I was in a law department for quite a long time, I've also been in risk in different roles, including supplier risk, reputational risk, and crisis management. I've also run an expense management program, which is a little bit unusual for a lawyer because most of us can't add, and I would be a good example of that, but luckily I had people to help me with that. And now I'm in a compliance role supporting the TD Securities capital markets business and heading the compliance function globally. And most of my support functions, I have been working with the capital markets business, so that's the business that I really know and love. But I have also worked with the retail banking and wealth management businesses, and I've been in straight enterprise roles where it was a little bit more the center rather than focused on the business. I've taken lots of different opportunities, lateral ones, and even in some cases lower roles, just to get exposure to new people that I really wanted to work with. New skills or new areas, or in some cases just to get back to being closer to the business and get reintegrated with it. On the other hand, when I got promoted, most of the time I was already doing the job that I got promoted to. So there was time where I had taken a stretch for myself and was really working to prove myself, so that promotion was more like an acknowledgement rather than a stretch in the beginning. I think in all these cases, it's really important to stretch yourself and look at what you can do based on the skills you've got, not what you've been doing. I think all of you are incredibly brave to be thinking about a move to a new country and looking at opportunities for you. And so really focusing in on your own personal capabilities will be key to making sure you get a great role for you. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about TD and the culture at this bank. Thank you. So TD is one of the 5 largest Canadian banks. I think when you're working in a country where there are very few banks, you kind of get a feeling that they're probably all the same. And I had the same feeling when I worked in a law firm many years ago, that all large law firms have the same culture, but it's not true. Having worked at a couple of Canadian banks and having worked abroad, not all Canadian banks are the same, not all companies are the same, and even in the same field, they do have very distinct cultures. TD in particular is very collaborative and team-oriented, and I think it's really important for you as you're looking for the company that you want to be part of, to be looking at what their culture is, and you can find out a lot on their website. In TD's About Us website, there's a lot of information about our core values, our commitment to our clients and our employees, our diversity and inclusion commitment, and our environmental commitments. A lot of that can be really helpful for you as you look for the company that fits you best, and also to help you when you're looking at how to talk to or approach that company, either generally or for particular roles. So with that, why don't we turn to talking about applications. So as you're getting started in the application process, make sure that your cover letter has been personalized to the role in the company that you're approaching, and make sure you've proofread it. I can't tell you how many cover letters I've seen that were clearly cut and pastes, where the font changed, the words changed, there were grammatical or typographical errors. Google and Word and the editors on them are your friend, and you should definitely take advantage of them to make sure that your letter comes across looking as professional as possible. And the point of doing all of that isn't to make sure that you can be an English major, it's to make sure that you're presenting yourself as fully professional to anybody that sees that letter. For me, when I'm going through cover letters, any ones that have mistakes like that just go straight out of my pile, even if the person is qualified, because it just indicates to me that they're not really focused on my role and wanting to make sure they present themselves well for me. Cover letters should also try to contain something that connects you to the company. Again, looking at the website and the values of the company can help you with that. Looking at things that you see the company involved in, new initiatives, special projects, things they're doing in the community, or even situations where you dealt with the company can help to personalize the letter that you're sending so that someone remembers your letter more than any other letter. And you should make sure that you research the company and find that connection for you. In terms of your resume, I know this is hard for a lot of people who aren't in North America or haven't yet applied to a company in North America, but it really shouldn't be longer than 2 pages. And I've worked with a number of people from ACCES over the years, and I've had lots of people react to that very strongly because in their country of origin, making sure you list everything you've done is how you really show that you're experienced. So I've seen people start with 7, 8, 9-page resumes and be really horrified at the idea of having to bring it down to 2 pages because in their context, that makes it look like they're not experienced. It's very much not the case here. In North America, a 2-page resume is about as much as anybody's going to read, and you really have to be very thoughtful about what you think is going to be important from your background and experience for the job that you're looking at, and take out those things that aren't, or make sure to shorten them in a way that it doesn't take up too much space on your resume. In particular, don't include large lists of qualifications. In the IT and technical space, maybe you need to do that if you're looking at applying for roles where you need particular technical skills, but other than that, it's very rare that you would want to do that. For example, if I'm hiring a secretary, and I know that's a slightly silly example, I don't want to see them listing Word, Office, Excel, or PowerPoint on their resume. I assume that they've got those qualifications, otherwise they wouldn't apply for that kind of a role. But they could put it more generally and just indicate that they're proficient in all Office software. So look for opportunities like that where you can more shortly say a whole bunch of stuff that's in your experience. Also, go back to the company's website again to make sure you're using words that resonate with the company. In TD's case, you'll see words like commitment, collaboration, and teamwork show up a lot in our website. And so that gives you a trigger that those are words that the employer is going to want to see. In other companies, you'll see innovation, leading, being out there in some way, individual success, things like that, that will give you a very different sense of what kind of words you might want to use for that company. So now let's talk about interviews and mentoring meetings. And there are 2 kinds of things here. So the first one is networking or mentoring meetings. In both cases, you should make sure you bring a copy of your resume, even if it's been sent before. If it's different because something has changed and you've added something, make sure you note that. But if you've just been doing editing, don't point that out. It makes it look like the first one that you sent wasn't very well thought out. And let's just spend a second on what the difference is between a networking meeting and an interview. A networking meeting is really more like a coffee chat, introducing yourself to someone, getting to know who they are, seeing what kinds of opportunities they have in their company, what kind of company they have, and where there may be things that you could fit into. You're not being interviewed in that case. You have no no expectation that there's a particular job that might suit you. You're just getting to know the person and hoping that you can make a bit of an impression on them so that they can either give you some feedback for the future or at least keep your name in their own mind as they see things coming up. So it's important in a networking meeting not to treat it as something where the individual is an obligation to try and find you something. It's just a meeting. It's just an opportunity for you to get in front of someone to learn things. And like I said, if you're lucky and you've done a great job, they'll keep you in mind when things come up, but don't expect it when you're entering that meeting. An interview, on the other hand, of course, means that there's a particular role that you put your name in for or that someone else has nominated you for. In this case, you really do have an expectation that there's a role that you're talking about specifically. So make sure that you've thought about what that role is and what that company is. Be prepared to ask questions, but if they've given you a really great explanation of things, if your conversation has been good and deep, you may not have questions. Don't force it and don't feel like you need to have a question just for the sake of asking a question. Frankly, I find when people do that, the question that they ask often doesn't make a ton of sense and sort of knocks down my impression of them a little bit because it feels like they're doing something to tick a box. So if you've got questions, absolutely ask them and do your research to try to make sure you have some. But if they get answered in the conversation, acknowledge that and frankly be appreciative that you've had a great conversation where they did get answered. I said using the company's website a few times. I do really think that's important. In terms of timing, this is one that often, again, is a bit interesting depending on your culture. So I've had people who have come to an interview 20, 30 minutes early. That's really hard. In many companies, we don't have a lot of places for people to sit. Reception areas don't really exist the way that they once did. So it's a bit of a challenge to know where to have someone be for that period of time. And it does make me feel a bit put upon because I've got a lot of meetings in my day. I dedicated a period of time for meeting with you. I didn't dedicate time for figuring out what to do with you if you came too early. Being late is just not acceptable. And if for some reason transportation, for example, is working against you and you're going to be late, please make sure that you've contacted the person and let them know so that they know that that you are trying, that you're making an effort, that you're not being disrespectful to their time and to the fact that they've given you an opportunity. In the interview itself, I think in North America, interviews can often be a bit more personal and casual than people are sometimes used to from other places. And so having a story that helps you stand out can be really key. I've had a number of situations in interviewing people where they've told me a story, for example, about their first situations when they've come to Canada, things that were memorable and stood out for them, or stories about particular roles or situations they faced that really stood out for me, so that when I'm thinking about the 10 or 12 people I've met, there's something about that person that jumps out and keeps them top of mind. There was one that I particularly remember from an individual from ACCES in a speed mentoring context. So this is a thing that ACCES does that's really wonderful, where you have the opportunity to meet with a bunch of professionals who are in Canada and working, and you have about a 10-minute period of time to talk to them. So it's really quick, and for those of us who are acting as mentees, we might see 10 or 12 people in the course of an hour and a half. So it's really hard to remember each individual. This individual had a story about when they first came to Canada and needed to find their first bank, and how they went to a number of banks and were unsuccessful in getting what they were looking for, and ultimately got sent to TD and were a little bit resigned that it wasn't going to work and it wasn't going to happen because they hadn't had a good experience in the other Canadian banks they've been to, and were so impressed with the TD employee who really connected with them and wanted to find a solution and went above and beyond to find it for them. I really remembered that person afterwards, even though I'd met a lot of people, just because they had a really great, unique story that happened to be about TD. It didn't have to be, but it happened to be, and so that stood out for me. Had other people who have talked about situations in terms of coming to the country and getting their children settled, or in work situations where they've had projects or problems to deal with, how they've worked through them and how that's helped them gain the confidence to do different things. People who have specific capabilities or strengths that have helped them through situations are also really good. We've already talked a bit about networking and that there isn't an obligation there. But whether it was a networking meeting or an interview, again, always send a thank you. It's really respectful of people's time and the fact that they've given you the opportunity to meet with them. So a quick thank you by email is great and always appreciated. But in doing that, as we talked about with your cover letters and your resume, make sure you double check the editing, the spelling, and the font. Getting thank yous that are cut and pasted really takes away from a great meeting that I may have had with someone. So we've talked about interviews and networking, so now let's talk about the thing that people always ask me, which is no Canadian experience. So what do you say in answer to the question that you don't have Canadian experience? I want to just start by level setting and providing a bit of context. Most Canadians are immigrants somewhere in their history. Other than our First Nations people, pretty much all the rest of us are immigrants somewhere in our family history. And because of that, I think we have a lot of people here who are very empathetic to your situation. My parents were immigrants, and if they didn't have people that helped them when they arrived, they wouldn't have achieved what they did, and they were very aware of that. And so they became the network for many people that were arriving from their country of origin here. In my situation, we often had phone calls from the airport to go pick someone up, and had people staying in our guest bedroom while they tried to find their feet in this new country. Things like ACCESS didn't exist then, and so my parents keenly felt an obligation to people from their home countries to help them get on their feet. I think that's pretty common amongst a lot of Canadians. And so you're ending up with someone who's talking to you who's probably empathetic to where you're coming from, and frankly, also probably recognizing the degree of bravery that it takes to do what you're doing. So how do you answer this question? And I think the big answer is focus on your transferable skills. The skills that you've had in working are the same skills that anyone would have working in any different employment opportunity. So it's really no different from any interview where you would focus on what you've done, your experiences and your learning that are transferable, not only to this country, but to the role that you're talking about. I think the other thing that you should do, though, is think about the skills and experiences that you have that differentiate you from a Canadian applicant. So, for example, companies like TD have a huge international workforce. We have a lot of clients in Canada who are immigrants or come from different cultures. So having people here who understand that and can help us make sure we give our clients a better client experience is a great differentiator that you bring to the table. Linguistic skills are another one, having an appreciation of how to work in a global business. All those things can actually make the fact that you don't have Canadian experience still a benefit for you and give you a leg up against a candidate who hasn't worked outside the country. So give yourself credit and try to make sure that you're thinking about what you bring that's different and unique so that you're bringing it forward. And then I'll talk a little bit about the positions that I hire for here at TD. So I have a global team, a fairly large Canadian team. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the slide to move. Thank you. Excellent. Most of my team is in Canada, but I do have a global team. And what we've tried to do in my team is create some entry-level positions for people. So we look for two things, either a program coordinator role, which is an entry-level role that is a little bit like an administrative assistant, but we give a bunch of additional project work to it and some learning of what the team does. So it's a good way to see what we do and to get into TD. I've hired from ACCESS several times for this role, and the longest I've had someone in the role is about 8 months because you're all coming from wonderful backgrounds, and what you really need is a foot in the door. So pretty much everybody that takes this role finds a home, a better fit in the organization between about 4 and 8 months. It's a bit of a revolving door for me, but I think it's a great way for the company to have an opportunity to bring new talent in. The other thing that we tend to hire for is when we have contract roles that are vacant. So either we need an extra pair of hands or we've got someone on leave. Again, we've brought a number of people in that way from ACCES, and in pretty much every case, they've either found a permanent position at the end of the contract, or more likely, they found a permanent position during the contract and have moved to a home of great fit for them for their future. What we're always looking for is someone who wants to learn and grow, someone who's a team player, and who portrays confidence without being arrogant. This is a kind of bank where we all want to really roll up our sleeves and work together to make it a better place. There are certainly other banks where individual confidence and having a demeanor where you're individually wanting to succeed and be ambitious is a better fit than it would be here. So as I said in the beginning, make sure you're looking at the corporate website to get a sense of what the culture is and whether that's the right fit for you. When you're talking to me, you need to help me understand why your experience is a fit for me. The no Canadian experience aside, and we've talked about that, I just won't necessarily understand your resume the way you do. There may be title differences in your country of origin or in the company that you worked with from what we have here. There may be terminology differences. Roles may be described in ways that I'm not familiar with. So really tell me your experience in a way that helps me understand how the fit works, because I may not see it. Not because I haven't read your resume, but more because there just may be a disconnect in terminology or roles. You might want to think about looking at what some of the Canadian equivalent roles would be for the roles you've had, so that you can make sure that you know what the titling would look like here to help Canadian employers understand that. As I said, interviews in North America, and certainly with me, are often a lot more informal than what you might be used to. Often I like to talk to people about who they really are, what their personal interests are, their family life, what brought them to Canada, where they see their future going in Canada or otherwise. That might be very different, and I've certainly had in some cases people ask me, why do I care? And why that makes a difference. For me, it's a lot about fit. We spend a lot of our day at the office, and if we're not fitting and getting in a place where we can get to know each other and get along, it doesn't make the day more fun for us, and that's what we're looking for. And as I said, I have had people who have said that in their country of origin, that's very unusual, that they maintain a very formal environment in their work life. So do think about and do some digging on what the company and the role is in terms of the formality or informality, so that you make sure that you're comfortable with where that's going to be and can talk to it in a way that feels comfortable for you. I hope that you will all find fabulous sustained roles in Canada, and I look forward to having some of you join us at TD as well. That's really all I wanted to talk about in terms of prepared remarks, but I'm more than happy to take any questions and see what we can do to help you. I will just also end by saying that I'm very happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. The one thing that I would ask is you let me know when you send your invitation where we got to know each other, so through this webinar, so that I'm familiar with how the connection works. With that, I turn it over to you, to Sonia, to let me know if you've got any questions.
Thank you, Emily. That was a very jam-packed webinar, and there was a lot of information, and everyone is asking questions. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Emily, for all the insights you've shared with us. So I see everyone's already started to type in their questions. I will give everyone a few moments to get your questions sorted and type them into the questions tab. So Emily, I'll start throwing questions at you now. All right, we're starting over here. So if someone is waiting for their PR and they haven't gotten their PR yet, but they're waiting for it, is there something that they can do in the meantime while they're waiting, like maybe upgrade qualifications, and how do they prepare for the job search in Canada?
Sure, that's a great question, Tanya. I would say a couple of things. I think the first thing is to make sure you've done the research on your own experience and qualifications. So if you've got qualifications in your country of origin, do some research to see if those are accepted here or what the equivalent is here, so that again, putting those on your resume, you can note to people what the equivalency is so they better understand what your qualification is. Obviously, for someone like me, who's got a law degree from your country of origin, I want to know whether it's a common or a civil law degree. I want to know if you're intending to write your equivalency exams here. Doesn't matter to me necessarily because I'm not in a law group, but I would be interested in, and you should have an idea of how you want to handle that. Again, doing research on some of the companies that are hiring in your field. What's the culture? What are you seeing in terms of what they've got available? Are the titles that they're using and the descriptions of the roles equivalent to what you've seen? In terms of actually upgrading your skills, I think that's a very personal question and based on the skills and the qualifications that you've got. In some areas, project management, for example, qualifications are very equivalent across countries, so you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. Is another area. But if you're doing your research, you're seeing that they're asking for things like the CFA, the financial analyst's qualification, or the Canadian securities course. You might want to look at whether there's some opportunities for you to do those kinds of things on. Does that answer the question, Sonia?
Yes, I think it does. Thank you so much. Alexia has a question, wants to know, and I think a lot of people are asking about matching their resumes with the job ad, and they want to know what percentage should a resume match with the job description?
Also a really good question. I think it's not so much what percentage should match, but how do you feel about your capabilities? And let me be a little clearer on that. So as I said, I'm a lawyer by background. That's not the kind of role I'm in now. I haven't been on and off for a long time. But
Sorry, Emily, there's a lot of disturbance on your end. I don't know if you have a mic, if you have headphones or.
I just turned off my fan. Does that help?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so it was probably just my fan. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, so matching your job skills to the resume. So I was saying for me as a lawyer, because I haven't been in legal roles for on and off a long time, what I had to really get clear on was what my actual abilities were, the things that I'm good at and that I enjoy. So for me, I really love people management. I love change management, process improvement, and I love making things more efficient. So what I was really focused on when I was talking to people about what my next role would be was those three skills and whether the roles that they had met those skills. I appreciate that's a little bit harder when you're looking at a resume, but when you're looking at what you've done in the role, I think being able to articulate not so much you had a job in this area and the job is that you're applying to is in the same area, that can be a bit clear, but what's the capability that you've got? What are the skills that you've got that make you a great candidate for the role that you're looking for?
Thank you. Next question is from Javier, and it wants to know how keen are companies for hiring someone who might have the education for the role, but not enough experience in the role?
So that's really a question of level in most cases rather than a question of whether they'll hire you or not. And certainly what I've seen is with a lot of candidates that have come to us from ACCES, that you do have to be very practical about what level you're going to come into a company. You're probably going to come in at a level that's lower than what you would have had in your country of origin or in the country that you've been working in most recently. So making sure that you're realistic and take roles at lower levels if you need to so that you get into the company, because it is an opportunity for you to overachieve and excel, and that'll get you moving forward. That's a much better answer for you than coming in at a higher level where the company's expectations might be a little more than what you're ready for, and then you don't have the opportunity to shine quite as easily.
Thank you. Our next question is asking, how would someone go about getting an informational interview with someone at TD in the division that they're interested in?
There are a few ways to do that. TD actually does partner with ACCES on a number of programs, and we participate in speed mentoring, so making sure that you stay on top of the programs that ACCES has available is a great resource. And the other possibility is getting connected with people at TD that may not be in the area you're looking for. As I said, I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. If someone does reach out to me and says, this is the area, I don't know anybody in that area, can you connect me? I will try. I'm not going to. I don't know everybody in the organization. There are 85,000 of us worldwide, but certainly happy to give it a try and to see if I can start you down the right path. You'll find that when you deal with people that have done volunteering for ACCES, most people are more than happy to do that. And so it's really just getting your first connection that will lead you down a path.
Thank you. Next question is from Vanya, and she was a recruiter by profession, and she's hired for banking and financial services in the past. And she wants to know, according to you, what are the top maybe few skills that a recruiter should possess in order to succeed in the banking sector?
Well, if she's a recruiter, I suspect she can answer this better than I.
Exactly.
But I don't think there's anything unique about the banking sector. As a recruiter, you have to be a terrific judge of character, of people's experience and skills. You have to be able to look at a role mandate and understand what the key skills are in it. I think the one additional piece is, and will be the unique piece that's not unique to banking but unique to a recruiter, is understanding what the market looks like for positions for that company and the roles that you're recruiting for, so you know who to be looking for, who to tap into in the market, and where to be able to find talent that might not be coming forward on its own. So I know the recruiters that I work with at TD, we really understand who the other banks are, who the people in the roles that I look for are in the other banks, and they have a view on the smaller financial organizations as well, so that they are looking for upcoming talent. When we do meet people that are great and that we don't have a role for now, I really rely on the recruiters to make sure that they keep in touch with those people periodically and are keeping an eye on what those people are doing in their careers, so that if a role comes open that would suit that person, that they're already connected to them and are trying to get them back in front of us.
Perfect, thank you. Jamie has a question, wants to know, what do you think of applicants who have career gaps, maybe due to survival jobs in Canada?
I think there are lots of people that have career gaps and challenges. My analogy for a career is you're the red car and you get on a highway. You don't know what any other car is doing on that highway or what they've done. So sometimes you have to get off the highway, sometimes you get in the slow lane, and sometimes you get in the fast lane. The only thing about those choices, getting off which lane you're in, for you, or whether they made sense for you. If you can put a sensible story together on why you got on or off the highway, or why you were in a different lane at different times, that's all you really can do, and that's how you stitch it all together. So we've got lots of people in the workforce that have taken time off because of child care or elder care responsibilities, people that went back to school, people that opted out for a period of time because they wanted to volunteer or do something different. As long as when they're telling their story to a prospective employer or to someone that they're networking with, they can explain what they learned and got out of that experience, then it's helpful to an employer to see the value of it. The challenge is when people apologize for things that they did in their career that are non-traditional and make it seem like it was a bad decision or something that was thrust upon them in a way that they didn't control. I have an example. One of my daughters recently graduated from university and decided that she didn't really know what she wanted to do and wasn't ready to take the next step. So she's been working and traveling for a period of time. There are a lot of people that will say to her, that she's getting behind or that she's not doing a good job at getting herself into a place where she can get a great career going. Her answer to them is that she's spending her time maturing, gaining skills, and learning how to work in different cultures and environments. And she thinks that'll make her a fabulous employee for a company sometime down the future when she decides which company she really wants to dedicate herself to. I think that's an awesome answer and a lot better than an answer that might say, I don't really know what I want to do with myself, so I'm just wandering around for a while. So think about what you've chosen to do in your career, whether you have gaps or changes like I do that don't make a whole lot of sense, like a lawyer going to do an expense control program, to be able to explain them to an employer in a way that makes you sound unique and like you've built some great capabilities and skills as a result of that experience.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for sharing that as well. I'm sure that a lot of people will be able to really relate now. The next question is from Priya, and she just wants clarity over whether you should carry your resume when you're going for an informational interview or networking event.
I do think you should. I think it's a good idea to always have it available. The best kind of networking event or informal meeting event that you go to, you will have a very short statement that will excite someone about wanting to know more about. What do I mean by that? It's your elevator story, if you can imagine that. So not starting with, I'm a lawyer, and then I did this, and then I did this. Mine would be, I'm a lawyer by background, but in my experience, I've learned to manage lots of different kinds of risks, and that's what I love to do for a company. If I say something short like that, if I'm lucky, the person will be interested in what that means, and they'll want to talk to me and ask a bit more about what that looks like and how I've done that and where that might take me in my future. To be able to answer that interest, to say, got a copy of my resume, which I'd love to leave with you, and I'd love to book some more time to talk a little bit more with you about what your experiences are, what you're doing, and how what I've done might be able to fit with that. That's a really awesome experience then for you. So you think about what's that opening line for you that gets someone interested and excited. Have your resume so that if they do ask more questions, you've got it on offer. And then think about how you build up to asking to have a longer conversation.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Priya. And Elizabeth here has a question, wants to know, do you only look for candidates that are eligible to work in Canada, or do you also employ people offshore?
I do have teams that are in other countries, so the US, UK, Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Ireland and the Netherlands. So I do hire in other countries, and certainly with my team, because it is a global team, we do consider ourselves one team and one partnership. So we have had lots of situations where either we've had resource constraints in a particular geography, so we've had to second people to help support that, or we've had people in geographies whose life is changing and they want to move somewhere, and we've tried to support that as well. So I've had people from Singapore come to Toronto. I've had people from Toronto go to London and New York. I've had people from New York go to London and Amsterdam. So, I think the nice thing about a company like TD is it is truly a global company. We do really care about our employees and their experience. And so if I have people who start in another geography and ultimately express an interest in moving, we will try to do something to help facilitate that.
Awesome. And what about PR card holders who have not landed in Canada yet? So they're on their way to Canada. Would you consider those people for an interview as well?
I would, but I do think that's a tougher one for people. I think there's very much a desire in most cases to have a face-to-face interview. And it's not uncommon for a recruiter to have the initial interviews by phone, start narrowing things down if we get a lot of resumes. But once I'm looking for the person who may ultimately be sitting in my team, I think there's very much a bias to being able to do that in person. So if you are coming, I think I would start applying things getting closer to your planned coming date rather than doing it too far in advance, because I do think that will be a bit harder for people to understand in terms of doing interviews that aren't face-to-face in some way.
Thank you, Emily. Hem has a question, wants to know, do banks often hire applicants with non-banking experience as well?
Sure, I think that depends a lot on the role that you're looking at. So in my team, as we support the capital markets business, there's a part of the team that is very securities law and capital markets oriented. It would be unusual for me to hire someone other than maybe a co-op student into that group if they didn't already have some capital markets and securities law experience. On the other hand, I have a surveillance team. I have two surveillance teams, and those teams really understanding coding and learning is much more common. So we'll often hire people into those teams that may not have had any banking experience, but are terrific coders or have other kinds of forensic backgrounds that give them the right mindset for what they're doing. I think that's a pretty common distinction in the organization, and you'll see lots of people going into IT, communications, and other kinds of support roles in particular, where they may not have worked in a bank before, but if you're going into a P&L role, so a business role, those it would be more common that they would be looking for some banking experience. The one exception to that maybe is in the retail bank, where they're targeting particular cultural groups or particular linguistic or geographic areas, where having the linguistic, cultural, or geographic skills and experience may make you a contender even if you don't necessarily have the business background.
Thank you. Priya's got another question regarding interview etiquette. What is the most appropriate time to come before an interview?
I'd say somewhere between 10 and 5 minutes, so long enough that the person you're meeting with knows you're there. As I said, not so long that they have to figure out what to do with you. Certainly coming too close to where the interview was earlier to make sure that you've given yourself enough time to find the building and the location. And for those of you who haven't been to Toronto before, our underground path system, which is where most of us live all winter long, can be enormously confusing. So making sure you've given yourself some time to end up in the right place is very key, but then don't go upstairs to the person's office until you're sort of in the 10 to 5 minute range beforehand.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Babak has a question, wants to know what's the best strategy for answering behavioral questions, such as if you're asked something like, if you had a conflict with your colleague or boss, how would you resolve it? So what's the best way to go about answering such questions?
So obviously being honest is incredibly important. And those are tricky questions. Things like, when you had a difficult situation, how would you handle it? I think it's important, first of all, to acknowledge that it does happen sometimes. And, through no fault of anyone's, for me, the experiences where I've had conflicting situations have almost always been situations where it's been clear, or it's become clear, that the person and I actually had different goals. So we were trying to solve different problems. So for me, what I found really effective is being able to make sure that I understand what the problems is between myself and the other person, so that we actually have agreed that we're solving the same problem. If we're not agreeing on the problem, we're probably not going to agree on the solution. Being able to take a situation where you can say there was some initial challenge and how you got through it and how you've learned from that and have an effective strategy to ensure that you can avoid those kinds of difficulties in the future is really what you want to be able to showcase to a potential employee.
Thank you. Liliana has a question, and I'm sure this question is everyone's asking this question right now, but it's regarding connecting to people on LinkedIn. They want to know what's the best way to keep in touch because they do end up getting the person to add them on their LinkedIn after they sent a nice customized message, but as soon as they send another message, to that new connection, asking to meet or talk on the phone, they don't reply. So, what should they be doing as their second message to this person that they're trying to get an informational interview with?
So I don't know how many LinkedIn contacts I have, but having been working with ACCES and some other charities for a while, I wouldn't be surprised if I had like 1,000 or something like that. And of those people, I probably actually face to face know maybe 100. So I think what the challenge is when you send the next note, so note number 2, for me, I need to be reminded why we were connected in the first place. And secondly, it's a good time for you to have done a bit of research on why this person would want to have a second meeting with you. So what's interesting, what's the connection, no different from the networking conversations we were talking about earlier. So something like, thank you for connecting with me after I attended your ACCES webinar. It was really interesting. And I've, now realized that I'm really interested in TD, having done some review of their website, and a couple of things jumped out at me, like X and Y. Would you have a few minutes for me to chat with you and get a bit more understanding of those things? Try and make it specific so that they can see, one, why do I know you? Why are they connected with you? Two, that you've done some thinking about that connection and what makes sense about it to both of you. Three, what the specifics are in terms of why they'd be taking time out to talk to you, so that it's not just a general, thanks for connecting with me, I'd now like to spend some time talking to you, which is fine. It just doesn't give me any idea of what we're going to talk about or who you are or what the connection is. It's just too open-ended. And then to me, from a timing perspective, that's the thing I'm going to put in a lower priority, because I just don't really have anything that raises it up in the priority ranking, if you see what I mean. Does that help?
I sure think it does. Thank you, Emily. Ayad has a question and wants to know how important is a cover letter when you're applying online?
I think a cover letter is frankly always important. And the reason it's always important is because not everyone is going to take the time to interpret your resume as against a role. You're really using your cover letter to make that interpretation for them, to pick out the one or two things about your experience that make you a great candidate for the role, and to give them a little bit of that story or personality color that they can't get just from a resume. So again, to use the TD example, if you're applying to a role at TD, to say, I've had these two experiences that really make me a great candidate for this role. And, I'm also really interested in the kind of collaborative, client-centered culture that I can see TD has. And that's something that speaks to me, and, give some example there, I think helps personalize what you're sending in as material, which your resume just can't do by itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that answers your question as well. Preeti has a question, wants to know, do you have any volunteer opportunities at TD?
So it's unusual in a Canadian company to have unpaid internships or volunteer opportunities. Just not really the way the labor laws work here. So you're much more likely to find volunteer opportunities in places like ACCES, which are not-for-profits and therefore take volunteers. Banks in particular are pretty fussy about making sure that people are working here, they're getting fair pay for the work that they're doing. So unpaid opportunities just don't really happen that way, and that's how I'm interpreting the word volunteer, and I think it's how most banks would interpret the word volunteer. Sonia, I don't know, different reaction to that.
I think you're right about that. So volunteering, especially in corporate settings, it's probably you don't see a lot of that happening. But again, if you do want to volunteer just to get some experience, maybe go to not-for-profit organizations, libraries, um, things, play the community centers, things like that. But other than that, I do think, Emily, you're very right about volunteer work in corporate settings. Um,
Sorry,
Chenier,
sorry,
sorry?
Sonia. Hold on what you just said for 1 second.
Yeah.
I think there are two other aspects of volunteering, though. As Sonia was saying, I think getting your experience and connections by volunteering with organizations in Canada is a great way to start getting into the culture and getting a better understanding of how things work here. It's also a good way to connect and meet with people. Not that I'm suggesting that everybody volunteer at ACCES, but because a lot of people from companies do volunteering at ACCES, you do have an opportunity to sort of informally come across people that you might not otherwise easily formally come across. The other aspect of volunteering that I think is important is the extent to which the company is dedicated to volunteering in its community. So at TD, volunteering is a huge commitment for us. We do track volunteer hours, and if I, for example, volunteer for an organization for more than a certain number of hours a year, TD will make a donation to that organization. So if volunteering or community impact is important to you and important to you in particular ways, so for some people it's new immigrants, for some people it's children, for some people it's sport, do make sure you look at your companies that you're looking at to see if that's something that they're interested in, because that can also be a great story for you and a connection to that company. So if I were to apply to another company, I do a lot of work with the United Way, and ACCES as a United Way member agency. I would want to know that any other company I'm looking at is a United Way supporting agency. And if I was writing to them or talking to them, that would give me the opportunity to say, I was really happy to see that your company is part of the United Way. That's something that's important to me. I would love to be talking to you about what opportunities you would have for me if I worked for your company to be able to continue the volunteering that I do in the United Way to help your company's corporate values.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was very well put together. Another thing I'd like to add is that if you don't have any, a lot of times people say, well, I don't have any Canadian references, which is fine because you can always use, your employers from back home. But in this case, if you have volunteered somewhere and you've built a good relationship with your supervisor or colleagues there, you've built some references over there as well that you can use when you're applying to jobs.
Great point.
Yeah, so just wanted to add. Chenier has a question, and I think a lot of people have the same problem here. What advice would you give to someone who's a little nervous about networking because they're a little introverted, and they know the importance of networking, but it's just really hard for them to get out there and meet people and be open. So, what's the best advice you can give them, Emily?
Being introverted can be tough in the corporate setting generally, and particularly, I think, for people who are new to North America. I think the important things to remember is, first of all, networking is not a bad thing. It's just about meeting people. You're asking any of those people other than a few minutes to meet with you. I think that's great for people who are introverted is, in my experience, people who are introverts ask great questions. And that's an awesome way for them to be seen, to be participating and out there. You don't have to look at it as a place where you're going to spend 10 or 20 minutes talking about yourself. You might end up having to do that, and you should be proud of yourself and confident in your experience and your ability to be able to do that. But the biggest part of networking is about asking questions. And I think introverts sometimes have an advantage in that they have a lot of great questions to ask. And so if they can rely on their question asking abilities, that's a super way for them to get forward in terms of making relationships.
Thank you, Emily. I think that's very that answers the question. Another thing, I mean, if in it's great to be networking in person, but I mean, if you really feel like, you get overwhelmed to going to so many different events, online networking always works as well on LinkedIn. So that's something that you should stick to as well. Alibek has a question, Emily. They want to know, how is age a major concern for employers for someone being perhaps too young or too old?
I don't. I think age is irrelevant, and it's really more about confidence and experience and the kind of role that you're looking for. So if you're relatively young, that typically means you don't have a lot of experience. So applying for a senior role doesn't make sense in that case. The more difficult one is if you've got a lot of experience, so perhaps you're a bit older, when you're coming into a new environment, you may end up applying for roles that are more junior than what your prior experience is. That's a bit more difficult, not because of your age, but because sometimes you'll get employers saying, well, you're overqualified. You're not going to want to keep doing this. You're not going to want to stay here long. You're not going to be committed to the role. The more important thing then for you is to have an answer to those questions. For me, because I have hired a lot of more experienced people into that program coordinator role, I think a great answer is, I want to, really be part of your company. I'm committed to your company. I'm committed to growing with your company. And I think this role is a great way for me to get into the company and have the opportunity to learn, to shine, and to show you what I can do, so that, together we will feel like there are better opportunities, or there are opportunities for me to move that will support your goals and the company's goals. Making sure that you're thinking about that leveling and how you explain the leveling as your experience, I think is a lot more important than thinking about age.
Thank you. Olu has a question, wants to know, can my accent affect the success of my job interview?
That's an excellent question. And it's a little bit like what I was talking about in terms of making sure that the format of your written materials is really crisp. The difficulty with accents can be that it can be difficult to understand you. So making sure, not that you don't have an accent, my parents have accents to this day, and they've been in Canada for, my mother came in 1949, so you do the math. Making sure that you're speaking clearly, that you really focus on what you're going to say, so that you can communicate it in a way that's clear, and that your interviewer and partner can understand. Lots of Canadians have accents and always will. So don't let that be the thing that worries you, but do make sure that you're speaking in a way that is clear. And if you find that you're not sure, get a friend or someone to have a test conversation with, so that you're practicing and making sure that you've got your speech set up in a way that's clear, articulate, that someone understands the message that you're sending.
Thank you so much, Emily. We had a lot of time for Q&A, and I just bring us to the end of our webinar now. Emily, do you want to say anything before I go ahead to my information that I'd like to share?
Yeah, I just again want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen and to be part of this. I always want to thank everybody who wants to come to Canada. I think it's a great country, and it's made better by every single person that comes here with a commitment to make it better. So I appreciate that you're interested in coming here. I want to thank ACCES and Sonia for giving all of us the opportunity to learn and get better at making sure that we keep our economy strong by bringing great candidates into sustainable super opportunities for their future. And it's something that TD is really committed to, and we wish every one of you all the best of success as you look forward to your future in Canada. So with that, thanks very much, Sonia, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I hope that should mean a lot to people to know that you're coming to the right place, and there's employers that are looking to hire professionals such as yourselves. I just wanted to divert your attention quickly to our website. We have e-access, so it's our online hub. If you still have any questions that were unanswered regarding your resume, interviews, networking, just about the Canadian job market, you can can check out any of our titles on our hub and check out different articles, videos, past webinars as well that you can check out. And a lot of people were asking if they will get a recording. Yes, everybody will get a recording. And again, thank you everyone for your participation. There is a survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd love to hear from you. You can stay in touch with us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. We are very active on our social media. We post all of our online and in-house events on there as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Emily, so much for all the insights that you've given today.